It is 2014, and the Colorado Community Rights Network, COCRN, is formed to challenge local and state pro-fracking politicians and challenge the state and federal laws which make corporate rights superior to community rights. Fracking, despite its long list of human and environmental harms, is promoted by the state. Fracking is administered into residential areas by local politicians. The Boulder County Commissioners have facilitated the drilling of over 200 fracking wells within Boulder County. Judge Dolores D. Mallard has nullified the East Boulder County-led Lafayette Community Bill of Rights, a citizens' initiative with a rights-based ban on fracking. COCRN begins working with community rights activists in Boulder County to form the Boulder County Community Rights Network, BCCRN. BCCRN organizes to launch its Community Rights Home Rule Initiative for banning fracking. BCCRN writes and circulates its petition. It would place the question of establishing a Boulder County Home Rule Charter Commission on the 2016 ballot. BCCRN would then campaign to elect a slate of community rights charter commissioners. These commissioners would write the charter for a new form of county government. That charter would include a community bill of rights and a rights-based ban on fracking. The Boulder County Home Rule Bill of Rights would enumerate and clarify the unalienable rights of people, communities, and nature to health, safety, and welfare. It would make those rights superior to unjust state and federal laws, laws which violate those rights, laws which mandate harmful corporate projects like fracking within local neighborhoods. Anticipating Judge Dolores D. Mallard would also preempt that ban, BCCRN would accept the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund's offer to defend the Charter's Community Bill of Rights and defend its rights-based fracking ban in court. At the same time, BCCRN would mobilize the people of Boulder County to stand firmly in defiance against state preemption of its Community Rights Home Rule Charter. BCCRN would move to delegitimize federal and state-granted corporate rights, which violate their inalienable rights to local community self-government. Unfortunately, BCCRN, its leadership, and its efforts are hijacked by loyal members of the Boulder County Democratic Party and by paid operatives from a non-government organization, a Democratic Party front group from the nonprofit Environmental Industrial Complex. The new leadership promotes county home rule itself as the remedy to Boulder County's fracking problem. It ignores the fact that the democratically elected fracking bans and moratoria of front-range home rule cities had already been preempted by Judge Dolores D. Mallard. The community rights activist founders of BCCRN, the originators of the Boulder County Community Rights Home Rule Initiative campaign, resign. The people of Boulder County are left with the belief that the state and local governments, the Democratic Party leadership, which administered drilling of the 200-plus fracking wells in Boulder County, will protect them and their county from fracking.
Cliff Wilming, there was an effort a couple of years ago to have a home rule charter instituted for Boulder County, and that was very much tied to community rights. Can you talk about what home rule is and how it is part of this, and maybe what happened with that effort?
Sure. It's an important conversation to have because, as a lot of us know, the reason that we were able to create the Community Bill of Rights in Lafayette that banned fracking and disposal of industrial wastes there, the reason that Longmont was able to ban the technology of hydraulic fracturing, and the reason that Boulder was able to create a 5-year moratorium on fracking were all because we were home rule communities. And what that essentially means is that the municipality has a small little, what almost serves as a kind of a mini constitution, and it's called your charter, your home rule charter. And that charter in Boulder, in Longmont, and in Lafayette basically determines the kind of local government that we have, and those efforts to ban or pause or create community bills of rights within Boulder County all fell as amendments to that charter, and that home rule qualification allowed us to do that. There's another possibility, and Boulder County is part of this, and we suffer under that qualification. A community or a municipality can also be statutory, which really means quite directly that it's kind of the child of the state government, that it's really just there as a means of enforcing state law wherever state law sees fit. The difference between a statutory community, which is what Boulder County is, and a home rule community. We've always said in the community rights effort across Colorado and actually nationally that the home rule status helps to build campaigns, and that these campaigns can start to articulate the community's demand for fundamental rights, but that the home rule status in itself is it's insufficient.
Because look what happened in Longmont and Lafayette, both home rule communities and both subject to Supreme Court overturning voter-approved amendments to their charters.
Right. And so when you had that home rule campaign that we started here, I believe that was in 2014, which originally was started under the leadership of the community rights effort in Colorado. What our position is that yes, we can build Boulder County into a home rule community, and in that sense, we can kind of eliminate the Boulder County Commissioners as the sole decision makers over Boulder County in regards to all kinds of things. Right now, fracking is really the leading edge and the most pressing issue. But those charter amendments can articulate living wages or affordable housing, whatever we would like. But the community rights effort always said that home rule campaign that we started was only a stepping stone to create a much larger movement that recognized that home rule itself was going to be used to directly tell the state that we no longer are going to abide by your expectations for us legally. The way that campaign shaped up, of course, is you got to get a certain amount of signatures on petitions, which we started to do. But during the course of 2014, the Community Rights Network here in Colorado was also pulled into a gigantic state ballot initiative effort that is so laborious and large that we weren't able to keep our eye on the ball here in Boulder County at the same time. And as we kind of moved to focusing on the state ballot initiative, that Boulder County home rule campaign eventually came under new leadership that started to articulate home rule as a cure. As though home rule itself was a means by which we could ban fracking and enforce our rights directly. But unfortunately, that newer leadership didn't really want to get into a much harder discussion, which is the fact that while we were running that home rule campaign, Lafayette and Longmont were both being sued by the Colorado Oil and Gas Association.
Despite their home rule status.
Despite their home rule status. In fact, if it wasn't for the home rule status, we wouldn't have had those bans and we would have never been sued. So, it's again one of those things where it's a democracy until you try to act upon the idea. But it's different. These are different approaches into coming into a similar campaign. One would say, well, home rule gives us greater decision-making capability in the county. And we all agree on that. But the alternative to that, or the small print, is that the home rule can only do so much legally, that it is not a legal cure in itself because, of course, as the Supreme Court articulately spoke this last spring, we don't have the right to local self-government here in Colorado, and we don't have the right to ban fracking. So, one view of that campaign was that campaign could be used as a lever to a much larger movement building so that we could start to defend Boulder County from a more serious perspective. And the other effort in that campaign said that home rule in itself was sufficient to fix the problem. And so what you ended up having is you had this this different viewpoint. And when the leadership changed, the Colorado Community Rights Network was essentially removed from that home rule campaign, and then it fell to the newer leadership that saw home rule as an end in itself. And unfortunately, that's where the whole effort kind of folded up. And so, yes, if you signed that petition in 2014, hoping that Boulder County could become home rule, that is still a possibility. But the Colorado Community Rights Network hasn't had possession of those home rule petitions for over 2 years now.
But you're saying, though, as part of the Colorado Community Rights Network, that home rule is only one part in one tool in an entire toolbox. It's not an end in and of itself.
Exactly, and that's an extremely important point to make because, I mean, when we banned fracking in Lafayette and created our Community Bill of Rights, which we say that we have the right to enforce to this day, the ink was barely dry on the votes when we got the lawsuit from the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, as we always said that we would. And so, you know, what you'll hear, and you'll hear this even today, is that you will hear these dominant forms of environmental activism that really seek to keep people as spectators or as hopeful players in the political scheme of things, and that, you know, that when you hear things like the Supreme Court ruling, it's almost described as a moral decision by the Supreme Court rather than the extremely predictable decision of a court whose job is to interpret the written law. So it's not like the Supreme Court individuals, those, you know, 9 individuals that are making decisions for all of Colorado now, along with the board of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. It's not like they showed up to work one day and said, this is what I feel in my heart of hearts should be right and just and moral, and it would be a tyranny of the majority if we should get local home rule or local control or rights where we live. Those Supreme Court justices are only reading the law as it's written by the legislature. And that's quite clear because that law has been written by the oil and gas industry. So, you know, one aspect of this type of activism is to view the legislature and the Supreme Court as bodies that we can hopefully influence, whereas the community rights effort has always said that all of those bodies are secondary to the authority of us as the people. And despite what they might want to rule on, and despite what their law says, our position is quite different. And so those are the I don't want to say that they're opposite viewpoints, but they're very different perspectives coming into a home rule campaign here in Boulder County. And it's exactly those differing viewpoints that fractured that campaign to the point that you no longer hear about it.
Well, Thomas Lindsay has also been critical of other approaches to get some type of local control, and he's mentioned Food and Water Watch. I mean, is there a way to not have that type of division on groups that are essentially working for the same thing? It seems that there is a divisive aspect to this, and maybe is there any type of common ground where you could see all of those groups maybe working together and maybe having some success as an entire movement as opposed to all working to get to the same place but using different strategies? Is there common ground, and is there a way to have it all go together?
Well, welcome to Movements 101. Movements are not the homogenous political narrow spectrum that a lot of the ways the history books describe them. Movements are always a massive collision of ideas and perspectives, and the effort on fracking here in Boulder County and Colorado and nationally is the same thing, because you know, even when you look back at movements like the segregation movement, I mean, segregation itself was based in an extremely a system that was based and institutionally fomented on racism, but segregation itself was still seen as not as important as oil. And when you have a system that has the titanic war efforts and empire that the United States does, the United States will fight the effort to eliminate the use of fossil fuels in very different ways than it fought segregation. So you had the federal government coming in to overrule the negation of the rights of African Americans down in Selma, Alabama, but you're not getting the federal government to weigh in on the rights of local people fighting for their health and welfare against fracking. So there's that perspective. And another difference between now and those times is the birth of the professional activist. You did not have that so much back in the 60s or in the 30s of the labor movement. And so you have what I've always called, and you can take it for what it's worth, but I've always viewed the professional environmental efforts and the not-for-profit groups as almost a cottage industry to environmental destruction. Because what these groups need to do first and foremost is to always generate new funds for themselves. They have million-dollar budgets, they have enormous heavy staffs, and they're also extremely aligned with the idea that the system itself can never actually be overcome or a new system built. And so that's the way those groups like Food and Water Watch conduct their activism. Food and Water Watch doesn't talk about overthrowing the system. It can't, because Food and Water Watch is part of the system. And what those NGO type groups like the Sierra Club and Food and Water Watch, where they position themselves is to get the best terms in a situation that they already understand is the proxy of the oil and gas industry to begin with. And when you come into this sort of thing, there's always this also says, I want to make the distinction between the leadership of groups like Food and Water Watch and the Sierra Club and the membership of Food and Water Watch and the Sierra Club, because the membership are coming into those groups and sending in their donations and writing their letters to the Congress with a good motivation. They want to see real change and they want to see the earth protected. However, just due to the links between those groups and the Democratic Party, those groups cannot call for a system change. And when we've found ourselves in the Colorado community rights effort here, and we have no professional staff, I should say that. Of course, we accept donations for all the work that we do, but we're all volunteers. When you set an idea that the system itself isn't broken, but it's actually fixed. It's not that the system is operating in an errant way to its design. It's operating perfectly to its design. And you set that idea on the same table as the idea that the system is by and large good and just and moral, but it sometimes gets a little confused, and it's our job to write the Congress and to help it back onto its moral compass. When you sit those two ideas together, they tend to cancel one of another out. And so, our experience here in Colorado, when we started to learn exactly how the system is so completely fixed, when we started to speak about that, we were regularly told that we should not say things like that. And we were told that almost exclusively by the environmentalists that make a wage from their work rather than the communities themselves, because that's an inherently threatening idea to their brand of activism.
So the community rights movement is acknowledging the system is the problem, as opposed to let's work and try and fix the system.
Yeah, it's what we're the lesson that we're trying to help inform, and I had to learn this the hard way myself. I wasn't born with this knowledge. Is that yes, the system itself is the nature of the fracking problem. The system is what grants the corporate charter to Anadarko Petroleum in order to work. The system is what has the legislature and the courts to overrun communities when we say ludicrous things like we have the right to protect our environment. The system is there to provide physical force, like you saw the attack dogs going after the First Nations up in Standing Rock. And so the system is the problem. We wouldn't have an oil and gas industry if it weren't for the United States government and its lower thresholds here in Colorado. And so, yes, we want to work with all of the people across Boulder County, but the community rights effort has always focused on what we consider the grassroots, which is the real thoughts and the real people that live here and work here and breathe here and raise families here, and that aren't doing this work for a paycheck. And so, I'm not trying to, this is not a personal attack on anybody that is in the managerial aspects of Food and Water Watch, but we do have a political difference with them. And, I think that doesn't mean that we don't personally get along, but having a different approach or a different perspective informs the kind of work that you do. And so, what we've struggled with the entire time here in Colorado is trying to show that the system isn't broken, that it's actually fixed, so that we can start to understand that system better, so that we can address it from a much clearer perspective, versus giving people the hope that the system will right itself with enough letters or enough emails or the next online petition and the next $25 donation. That brand of environmentalism has been around for about 30 or 40 years, and the fact that we can sit around the dinner table and talk about the end of life on Earth shows you how effective that is. And that's, that I point that criticism at myself as well. We need to be able to approach this problem from a bold and realistic perspective now. And we need to stop, we need to get away from this type of activism that keeps us as spectators, where all the decision making is taking place in legislatures and in corporate boardrooms. Our position here is that the people need to weigh in very directly now, and we no longer need to stop bowing our heads and apologizing and hoping to ingratiate ourselves to people in power. We need to really start taking some power ourselves and enforcing that.
Okay,